The clock on the dashboard read 11:47 p.m. as General Robert Hayes turned onto Maple Street, one of the most expensive neighborhoods in the city. He had just finished a 12-hour day at the Pentagon, discussing budget allocations and troop deployments with other high-ranking officials. The meeting had run much later than expected, but that was nothing new in his 30-year military career. At 53 years old, the general had learned to expect the unexpected. His black sedan moved quietly through the tree-lined street, past million-dollar homes with perfectly manicured lawns and three-car garages. This wasn't his neighborhood, but it was the fastest route home to his own house across town. After 3 decades of serving his country, including tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, he had earned the right to live wherever he chose. Tonight, though, he just wanted to get home to his wife and catch a few hours of sleep before another early morning. The general noticed the police car in his rearview mirror about 2 blocks back. It had been following him for a while now, keeping a steady distance. He thought nothing of it at first. Police patrols were common in wealthy neighborhoods like this one. But as he made several turns and the squad car continued to follow, a familiar feeling crept into his stomach. He had experienced this before, though not often in recent years. Officer Derek Mitchell had been having a rough night. His shift had started with a domestic violence call that took 3 hours to resolve, followed by 2 traffic accidents and a break-in report that led nowhere. He was tired, frustrated, and looking for something to make his night worthwhile. When he spotted the expensive black car driving through Oakwood Heights at nearly midnight, every instinct told him something was wrong. The car was moving exactly at the speed limit, which Mitchell found suspicious. In his experience, people only drove that carefully when they had something to hide. The windows were tinted, which made him even more curious about who was inside. This was a neighborhood where break-ins had been increasing lately, and Mitchell prided himself on being the kind of officer who paid attention to details. He ran the license plate through his system. The car was registered to Robert Hayes with an address on the other side of town. Mitchell frowned. What was someone from that area doing in this neighborhood at this time of night? His suspicions grew stronger. He decided to make a traffic stop. General Hayes saw the red and blue lights flash behind him and let out a quiet sigh. He had been pulled over exactly 3 times in his adult life, and each time had been an experience he would rather forget. But he was a law-abiding citizen who respected authority, even when that authority didn't always respect him back. He pulled over to the curb, turned off his engine, and placed both hands clearly on the steering wheel where they could be seen. This was protocol he had learned not just from driver's education, but from conversations with his father, his older brothers, and countless other men who looked like him. Keep your hands visible. Don't make sudden movements. Be polite but not overly friendly. Answer questions directly but don't volunteer extra information. These were survival rules passed down through generations. Mitchell approached the driver's side window, his right hand resting casually on his service weapon. He had made thousands of traffic stops in his 8-year career, but something about this one felt different. The driver was sitting perfectly still, hands on the wheel, looking straight ahead. Most people would be fumbling for their license and registration by now, or turning to look at him. This level of composure struck him as unusual. He tapped on the window with his flashlight. The driver slowly lowered it, and Mitchell found himself looking at a well-dressed black man who appeared to be in his 50s. The man was wearing what looked like an expensive suit and tie, even at this late hour. His gray hair was neatly trimmed, and his posture was remarkably straight. But none of these details registered with Mitchell. All he saw was what he expected to see. "Good evening, officer," the general said in a calm, clear voice. "Is there a problem?" Mitchell's jaw tightened. The man's tone was too confident, too composed. In Mitchell's mind, this wasn't how someone should act during a traffic stop. He interpreted the general's calm demeanor as arrogance, his politeness as mockery. "License and registration," Mitchell demanded, his voice sharp and unfriendly. "What are you doing in this neighborhood?" General Hayes remained perfectly still. "I'm driving home from work, officer. I'll need to reach for my wallet to get my license. Is that okay?" Mitchell's hand moved closer to his weapon. The formal way the man spoke bothered him. It sounded rehearsed, like he was trying to sound more educated than he really was. "Just get your documents," he said. The general slowly reached toward his jacket pocket, moving with deliberate care. His movements were precise, military in their efficiency, but Mitchell interpreted this as suspicious behavior. Every gesture seemed calculated to him, which only increased his paranoia. As General Hayes retrieved his wallet, Mitchell's radio crackled with a routine call from dispatch. Another officer was requesting backup for a minor incident across town. The sound made Mitchell more alert, more on edge. He was convinced he was dealing with someone dangerous. "Step out of the vehicle," Mitchell ordered suddenly. General Hayes paused, his wallet halfway out of his pocket. This wasn't a routine traffic stop anymore. He could hear the hostility in the officer's voice, see the tension in his body language. After 30 years in the military, he could read people well. This situation was escalating quickly. "Officer, I haven't broken any traffic laws," the general said carefully. "I'm just trying to get home to my family. If you'll let me show you my identification, I think we can clear this up quickly." But Mitchell was no longer listening to the words. He was focused on what he believed he was seeing. A well-dressed, black man in an expensive car acting too calm, too confident. In his mind, this could only mean one thing. The man was probably a drug dealer, using his nice clothes and expensive car to blend in while conducting business in wealthy neighborhoods. "I said get out of the car," Mitchell repeated, his voice rising. "Now." The general remained seated, his hands still visible on the steering wheel. He was a man who had commanded thousands of soldiers, who had made split-second decisions that saved lives, who had earned the respect of presidents and prime ministers. But right now, none of that mattered. Right now, he was just another black man being pulled over by a police officer who had already made up his mind about who he was and what he represented. The night air was cool and quiet around them. Streetlights cast long shadows between the expensive houses. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. It was the kind of peaceful suburban scene that appeared in movies and television commercials. But for General Hayes, sitting in his car with both hands on the steering wheel, peace was the last thing he felt. Mitchell's radio crackled again, but he ignored it. His full attention was focused on the man in the car and his growing certainty that this traffic stop was about to become something much more significant. He had no idea how right he was or how wrong he was about everything else. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. General Hayes remained perfectly still in the driver's seat, his years of military training keeping him calm despite the obvious hostility radiating from the officer standing beside his car. He had faced enemy fire in 2 different countries, had made decisions that affected thousands of lives, but this moment felt more dangerous than anything he had experienced in combat. Officer Mitchell's patience was wearing thin. In his 80 years on the force, he had developed what he believed was a sixth sense about people. Something about this man bothered him deeply. The expensive suit, the calm demeanor, the way he spoke with perfect grammar, it all felt like an act. In Mitchell's experience, people who tried this hard to appear respectable were usually hiding something big. "I'm not going to ask again," Mitchell said, his hand now resting openly on his service weapon. "Get out of the vehicle." General Hayes knew he was at a crossroads. He could comply and hope that showing his military identification would quickly resolve the situation. Or he could exercise his rights as a citizen and ask why he was being ordered from his car when he had committed no crime. Both choices carried risks, but his military training had taught him that sometimes the safest course of action was also the most dangerous. "Officer, I'm going to reach for my wallet very slowly," the general said, his voice steady and clear. "My identification will explain everything." As the general's hand moved toward his jacket pocket, Mitchell's paranoia reached a breaking point. The controlled movement looked suspicious to him. The man's calm voice sounded arrogant. Everything about this situation confirmed his worst assumptions. "Gun!" Mitchell shouted, drawing his weapon in one swift motion. "Show me your hands. Show me your hands right now." The general's hands shot up immediately, his wallet falling to the floor of the car. He had been reaching for his identification, nothing more, but he understood that explanations would have to wait. When a police officer draws a weapon, compliance is the only safe response. Hands on the steering wheel. Mitchell continued shouting, his gun trained on the general. "Don't move, don't you move!" Other drivers had begun to slow down as they passed the scene. The sight of a police officer with his weapon drawn was unusual in this quiet neighborhood. A few cars pulled over to the side of the road, their occupants uncertain whether they should intervene or simply watch from a safe distance. General Hayes placed his hands exactly where Mitchell had demanded, his movements slow and deliberate. His heart was pounding, but his face remained calm. He had been in situations where showing fear could get you killed, and those lessons served him well now. "Officer," he said quietly, "there's been a misunderstanding. I'm reaching for my identification. I'm not armed." But Mitchell was beyond listening to reason. The adrenaline was pumping through his system, and every one of his biases was now fully engaged. He saw a black man in an expensive car acting too calm, speaking too well. In his mind, this could only mean one thing. He was dealing with a high-level criminal who was used to talking his way out of trouble. A young couple in a nearby car had pulled over and was recording the scene with their phone. They whispered to each other, uncertain what they were witnessing but sensing that something was very wrong. The woman in the passenger seat had grown up in this neighborhood and had never seen anything like this happen here. "What's he doing?" she whispered to her boyfriend. "I don't know," he replied, keeping his phone camera steady. "But this doesn't look right." Mitchell noticed the gathering crowd and felt a surge of authority. He was in control here and everyone was watching. This was his moment to show what real police work looked like. He had no idea that several people were recording, or that his actions were about to be broadcast to the world. "Step out of the car slowly," Mitchell commanded again, his voice carrying across the quiet street. "Keep your hands where I can see them." General Hayes began to comply, moving with the same careful precision he had shown throughout the encounter. As he opened the car door and began to step out, his military bearing was unmistakable. His posture was straight, his movements controlled, his presence commanding even in this vulnerable position. But Mitchell saw none of these things. He saw only what his prejudices allowed him to see. A black man who was taking too long to follow orders, moving too confidently, failing to show what Mitchell considered appropriate fear and submission. An older man walking his dog had stopped on the sidewalk, watching the scene unfold. He lived in this neighborhood and knew most of the families on this street. He had never seen this black man before, but something about the way the police officer was behaving troubled him deeply. "Is this really necessary?" the dog walker called out. Mitchell spun around, his weapon still drawn. "Stay back. This is police business." The dog walker raised his hands and stepped back, but he continued to watch. He pulled out his phone and began recording as well. By now there were at least a dozen witnesses scattered around the scene, most of them filming. General Hayes stood beside his car, hands raised, watching the situation spiral out of control. He could see the fear in the officer's eyes, could recognize the signs of someone operating on adrenaline and assumptions rather than facts. He had seen young soldiers make similar mistakes in high-stress situations, though never with consequences quite like this. "Officer," he said again, his voice remaining calm despite the weapon pointed at him. "I'm a general in the United States Army. My identification is in my wallet. If you'll allow me to show it to you, this whole situation can be resolved in 30 seconds. Mitchell's eyes narrowed. Now the man was claiming to be a general? This was exactly the kind of lie he expected. Criminals often claim to be teachers, ministers, or other respectable professions when caught. Claiming to be a military officer was a new one, but it fit the pattern perfectly. "Right," Mitchell said with obvious disbelief. "And I'm the President of the United States. Turn around and put your hands on the car." A woman in a car across the street had rolled down her window and was listening to every word. She was a military wife whose husband was deployed overseas. And something about the man's bearing, his voice, his whole demeanor reminded her of the officers she had met at various military events. She began to suspect that he might actually be telling the truth. As General Hayes turned and placed his hands on his car as instructed, Mitchell felt a surge of satisfaction. He had taken control of the situation, had shown everyone watching that he knew how to handle potential criminals, regardless of how they dressed or spoke. But even as Mitchell was congratulating himself on his police work, the situation was beginning to change in ways he couldn't see. The videos being recorded by multiple witnesses were already starting to appear on social media. People were sharing the footage, asking questions, trying to identify the well-dressed man being held at gunpoint for apparently no reason. In police stations and military bases across the region, people were beginning to recognize a face that appeared regularly on the news, in military publications and at official ceremonies. The man being humiliated on a quiet suburban street was not just any citizen. He was one of the most respected and decorated officers in the United States Army. Mitchell had no idea that his life was about to change forever. He stood behind his suspect, weapon drawn, feeling completely in control of the situation. In his mind, he was doing exactly what a good police officer should do. He was protecting the community from someone who clearly didn't belong in this neighborhood at this time of night. The general remained motionless against his car, his hands flat against the roof, his dignity intact despite the circumstances. He had faced much worse than this and had always emerged with his honor intact. Tonight would be no different, though he suspected that for Officer Mitchell, nothing would ever be the same again. The first police backup unit arrived exactly 4 minutes after Mitchell had called for assistance. Sergeant Lisa Chen stepped out of her patrol car and immediately surveyed the scene. What she saw made her stomach drop. A well-dressed black man was standing against an expensive sedan, with his hands on the roof, while Officer Mitchell stood behind him with his weapon still drawn. Chen had been a police officer for 12 years and a sergeant for the last 3. She had seen Mitchell make questionable decisions before, but this scene looked wrong from every angle. The man against the car showed no signs of resistance or aggression. His posture was calm, almost military in its precision. Meanwhile, Mitchell looked wired, his weapon hand trembling slightly with adrenaline. "What's the situation, Mitchell?" Chen asked as she approached. "Suspicious vehicle in the neighborhood," Mitchell replied, not taking his eyes off his suspect. Driver was acting strange, wouldn't follow simple commands. Claims to be some kind of military officer. Chen looked more closely at the man against the car. There was something familiar about his profile, something that nagged at the back of her memory. She had seen this face before but couldn't immediately place where. "Has he been searched?" she asked. "Not yet. I wanted backup before I got too close." The growing crowd of witnesses continued to record and watch from a safe distance. By now, the videos were spreading rapidly across social media platforms. People were sharing the footage with captions asking if anyone recognized the man being detained. Military personnel, government workers, and news followers were beginning to respond with increasing alarm. A second backup unit arrived, and Officer Tony Rodriguez stepped out. He took one look at the scene and walked over to Chen. "What's Mitchell gotten himself into now?" Rodriguez whispered. "I'm not sure yet," Chen replied, "but something about this doesn't feel right." General Hayes remained perfectly still against his car. He could hear the officers talking behind him, could sense that the situation was becoming more complex. He had been in enough high-stakes situations to know that patience was often the most powerful weapon available. "Officer," he said clearly, "my identification is in my wallet on the floor of my car. If someone would retrieve it, this entire situation could be resolved immediately." Mitchell's grip tightened on his weapon. "I told you to stay quiet." But Chen was listening. Something about the man's voice, his bearing, the way he spoke with such confidence even in this position, was triggering a memory. She stepped closer, trying to get a better look at his face. Suddenly, her eyes widened in recognition. "Mitchell," she said urgently, "lower your weapon." "What? Why? Just do it now." But Mitchell was too caught up in his own narrative to listen. In his mind, he was the hero of this story, the sharp-eyed officer who had caught a criminal trying to blend in among respectable citizens. Chen moved around to get a better angle on the suspect's face. When she saw him clearly in the streetlight, her worst fears were confirmed. She recognized him from news coverage of military ceremonies, from photographs in newspapers, from television interviews about military policy. "Oh no," she whispered. "Oh no, oh no, oh no, what's wrong?" Rodriguez asked, seeing the color drain from her face. Chen quickly moved to Mitchell's side and grabbed his arm. "You need to holster your weapon right now. I'm not holstering anything until—" "Mitchell!" Chen's voice cut through the night air with an authority that even he couldn't ignore. "That's General Robert Hayes." Mitchell blinked, not understanding. "What?" "General Robert Hayes, United States Army. He's been on the news a dozen times this year alone. He just came back from briefing Congress on military budget allocations." The name meant nothing to Mitchell initially. but Chen's obvious panic was impossible to ignore. "Are you sure? Look at him, Mitchell. Really look at him." For the first time since the stop began, Mitchell actually studied the man's face instead of just seeing what his biases expected him to see. The strong jawline, the graying hair, the unmistakable bearing of someone accustomed to command. Even from behind, even in this humiliating position, there was something undeniably authoritative about him. Rodriguez had moved closer and was now looking at the suspect as well. "Holy mother of—" he began, then stopped himself. He pulled out his phone and quickly searched for General Robert Hayes. When the images appeared on his screen, he held the phone up next to their suspect's profile. It was a perfect match. "Mitchell," Rodriguez said quietly, "you need to put your gun away right now." The crowd of witnesses had grown to nearly 20 people. Cars continued to slow as they passed, drivers craning their necks to see what was happening. Several people had called friends and family members, describing the scene and asking if anyone knew who the man being detained might be. A young military veteran named Kevin, who lived 2 blocks away, had been walking home from a late dinner when he noticed the commotion. As he got closer and saw the man against the car, he immediately recognized him. General Hayes had been the keynote speaker at Kevin's commissioning ceremony just 2 years earlier. "That's General Hayes," Kevin called out to the crowd. "I know him. He's a 4-star general." The crowd's murmur grew louder. People began pulling out their phones to search for the name. Within seconds, multiple people were looking at photographs of General Robert Hayes in full military dress uniform, comparing them to the man currently being held at gunpoint by a suburban police officer. Chen was now standing directly beside Mitchell, her voice low and urgent. "You have got to end this right now. Do you understand what you've done? Do you have any idea who this man is?" Mitchell's world was beginning to shift on its axis. The confident narrative he had constructed was crumbling around him, but his pride was too strong to let him admit his mistake immediately. "How was I supposed to know?" he said defensively. "By asking for his identification instead of drawing your weapon," Chen snapped back. General Hayes, who had heard every word of the conversation behind him, finally spoke. "Officers, may I please turn around? I'd like to show you my identification so we can resolve this matter properly." Chen immediately nodded. "Yes, sir. Please turn around slowly." As General Hayes turned to face them, his dignity intact despite everything that had happened, Mitchell got his first clear look at the man he had been holding at gunpoint. The general's presence was unmistakable. Even without his uniform, even after being subjected to this treatment, he carried himself with the bearing of someone accustomed to respect and authority. "My wallet is on the floor of my car," General Hayes said calmly. "May I retrieve it?" "Of course, sir," Chen said quickly. She shot a look at Mitchell that could have melted steel. The general moved slowly to his car and picked up his wallet from the floor. He opened it and removed his military identification card, along with his driver's license. He handed both to Chen. As she examined the cards under her flashlight, Chen's hands were actually shaking. The identification confirmed what she already knew. The man they had been treating as a criminal was General Robert Hayes, one of the most decorated officers in the United States Army. By now, the videos of the incident were going viral. Military personnel across the country were sharing the footage, expressing outrage and disbelief. News outlets were beginning to pick up the story. The incident was spreading beyond social media and into mainstream news coverage. Mitchell stood frozen, his weapon finally holstered, watching his career evaporate in real time. The magnitude of his mistake was beginning to dawn on him, but it was too late to undo anything. Every moment of the last 15 minutes had been recorded by multiple witnesses from multiple angles. General Hayes accepted his identification back from Chen with the same calm dignity he had maintained throughout the entire ordeal. "Thank you, Sergeant," he said. "I appreciate your professionalism." Chen wanted to apologize, to explain, to somehow make this right, but she knew that nothing she could say would erase what had just happened. The general looked at Mitchell with eyes that held no anger, only a deep sadness. "Officer," he said quietly, "I hope you'll take some time to think about what happened here tonight." Mitchell couldn't meet his eyes. The man he had been convinced was a criminal was looking at him with more dignity and grace than Mitchell had shown anyone in years. The contrast between his own behavior and the general's response was too stark to ignore. In police departments across the region, Supervisors were getting phone calls about the incident. In military installations around the world, personnel were watching the videos with growing anger and disbelief. The story was spreading faster than anyone could have imagined, and there was no way to contain it now. The first news van arrived 23 minutes after the initial traffic stop. The reporter, Jennifer Walsh from Channel 7 News, had been monitoring police scanners when she heard about an incident involving a high-ranking military officer. She never expected to find General Robert Hayes standing beside a police car in a suburban neighborhood, surrounded by officers who looked like they wanted to disappear. By this time, the videos from the scene had been viewed hundreds of thousands of times across various social media platforms. Military veterans, active duty personnel, and civilians alike were sharing the footage with increasingly angry comments. The hashtag #General Hayes was trending nationally, with people demanding answers about how this could have happened. Captain Maria Rodriguez arrived just as the news van was setting up its camera equipment. She was the shift supervisor and had been at home when the call came in. The desk sergeant who called her had been barely able to explain what was happening, but the words General Hayes and gun drawn were enough to get her dressed and in her car within minutes. Captain Rodriguez surveyed the scene with growing dread. She could see General Hayes speaking calmly with Sergeant Chen, his composure remarkable under the circumstances. Officer Mitchell stood apart from the group, looking like a man who had just watched his life fall apart. The crowd of witnesses continued to grow, and she could see phones recording from multiple angles. "Sergeant Chen," Captain Rodriguez called as she approached. "Brief me on the situation." Chen walked over, her face pale with stress. "Captain, Officer Mitchell initiated a traffic stop on General Hayes approximately 30 minutes ago. The general was driving through the neighborhood when Mitchell deemed his presence suspicious. Things escalated quickly and Mitchell drew his weapon. What was the probable cause for the stop?" Chen hesitated. Mitchell reported suspicious behavior, but from what I can tell, the general was simply driving home from work. Captain Rodriguez closed her eyes for a moment, trying to process the magnitude of what had happened. She had been a police officer for 20 years and had never encountered a situation quite this catastrophic. General Hayes approached them, his military bearing unchanged despite everything he had endured. "Captain Rodriguez, I presume?" "Yes, sir," she replied, extending her hand. "I cannot begin to express how sorry I am about this incident." The general shook her hand firmly. "I appreciate that, Captain. I'm sure you understand that this situation extends far beyond a simple traffic stop." Rodriguez nodded grimly. She knew that within hours, this incident would be the subject of investigations by her own department, the state police, the FBI, and probably several other agencies. The political ramifications alone would be enormous. "General Hayes," she said carefully, "would you be willing to accompany us to the station so we can document this incident properly? I want to make sure we have a complete record of what happened here." "Of course," the general replied. "I think that would be appropriate." Meanwhile, Officer Mitchell remained frozen in place, watching the scene unfold around him. Other officers at the scene were avoiding eye contact with him, and he could hear them whispering among themselves. His radio had been buzzing with calls from other units asking for details about the incident, but he couldn't bring himself to respond. The second news van arrived, followed quickly by a third. Reporters were setting up cameras and approaching witnesses, trying to piece together what had happened. The story was no longer contained to social media. It was becoming a major news event in real time. Jennifer Walsh approached Captain Rodriguez with her cameraman in tow. "Captain, can you comment on the incident involving General Hayes?" "We're still investigating the situation," Rodriguez replied diplomatically. "We'll have a statement later." But it was too late for damage control. The videos spoke for themselves, and they were spreading faster than any official response could hope to contain. Dr. Patricia Williams, a local community leader who had been driving through the neighborhood when she saw the commotion, had stopped to witness the scene. She knew General Hayes from various community events and was horrified by what she was seeing. She had immediately called her contacts at the NACP and the Urban League, and she knew that civil rights organizations would be responding to this incident within hours. "This is exactly what we've been talking about," she said to a reporter who approached H. "Sure. It doesn't matter if you're a decorated military officer or a Nobel Prize winner. If you're a black man driving through certain neighborhoods, you can become a suspect for no reason at all. The crowd of witnesses had grown to more than 30 people. Many were neighbors from the surrounding area who had come out to see what was happening in their quiet community. Others were people who had recognized General Hayes from the viral videos and had driven to the scene to show their support. Kevin, the young veteran who had first identified the general, was speaking with reporters. "General Hayes spoke at my commissioning ceremony," he explained to the camera. "He's one of the most respected officers in the entire military. The fact that this could happen to someone of his stature shows how deep these problems really go." Back at the police station, Chief David Thompson was pacing in his office, fielding phone calls from reporters, city officials, and his own supervisors. The videos from the scene had reached his desk within minutes of being posted online, and he knew he was facing the biggest crisis of his career. "How bad is it?" he asked his deputy chief, who had just finished watching the footage for the third time. "It's catastrophic, Chief." Mitchell drew his weapon on a 4-star general for no apparent reason. "The whole thing was recorded by multiple witnesses. It's going to be on every news channel in the country by morning." Thompson sat down heavily in his chair. He had known Mitchell for years and had always considered him a solid, if sometimes overzealous officer. But this incident revealed something much darker than overzealousness. At the scene, General Hayes was preparing to leave with Captain Rodriguez when he noticed Mitchell standing alone beside his patrol car. The officer looked defeated, his shoulders slumped, his usual confident demeanor completely gone. The general walked over to him, leaving the small crowd of officials and reporters behind. Mitchell looked up as he approached, unable to hide his surprise. "Officer Mitchell," the general said quietly, "I want you to know that I hold no personal animosity toward you." Mitchell struggled to find words. "Sir, I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything right now," the general replied. "But I hope you'll use this experience to examine your own assumptions and biases. The badge you wear comes with tremendous responsibility." Mitchell nodded, tears forming in his eyes. The general's grace in this moment made his own behavior seem even more shameful by comparison. "I hope you can forgive me," Mitchell said. General Hayes was quiet for a moment, then said, "Forgiveness is between you and your conscience, officer. What matters now is what you learn from this experience." As the general walked away to join Captain Rodriguez, Mitchell remained by his patrol car, watching his career and reputation crumble around him. The videos would be viewed millions of times. His name would be associated forever with this incident. His actions had not only hurt an innocent man, but had also damaged the reputation of every good police officer who wore the badge with honor. The news coverage was already expanding beyond the local market. National news networks were picking up the story, and political commentators were beginning to weigh in on its implications. This was no longer just a local incident. It had become a symbol of larger issues that the entire country was grappling with. General Hayes got into Captain Rodriguez's patrol car for the ride to the station, his dignity intact despite the ordeal he had endured. As they drove away from the scene, he looked back at the crowd of witnesses, reporters, and police officers still gathered on the quiet suburban street. He knew that this incident would follow him for the rest of his career, but he also knew that it could serve a larger purpose. If his experience could help others understand the reality of racial profiling and police misconduct, then perhaps some good could come from this terrible situation. Behind them, Officer Mitchell stood alone in the flashing lights of the remaining police cars, wondering how he would explain this night to his wife, his children, and himself. By 6 o'clock the next morning, the video of General Hayes being held at gunpoint had been viewed over 2 million times. The story had made it to every major news network, with CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, and others leading their morning broadcasts with footage from the scene. The hashtag #Justice for General Hayes was trending worldwide, with military personnel, veterans, and civilians sharing their outrage and support. Officer Derek Mitchell woke up to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. His phone had been buzzing all night, but he hadn't been able to bring himself to look at it until now. Most of the messages were from fellow officers, family members, and friends who had seen the news coverage. The tone ranged from concern to horror to disappointment. His wife, Linda, had been awake most of the night, alternating between crying and staring at the ceiling. She had watched the videos on her phone with growing disbelief. This wasn't the man she had married, or at least not the man she thought she had married. The Derek Mitchell in those videos was someone she barely recognized. "Derek," she said softly as he sat on the edge of the bed with his head in his hands. "What were you thinking?" He couldn't answer because he honestly didn't know. In the cold light of morning, with his adrenaline gone and his biases exposed, he couldn't explain his actions even to himself. At the police station, Chief Thompson was holding an emergency press conference. The media room was packed with reporters from local and national outlets, all demanding answers about how one of their officers could draw a weapon on a decorated military general for no apparent reason. The incident involving General Hayes is under immediate and thorough investigation, Thompson announced, reading from a prepared statement. Officer Mitchell has been suspended pending the outcome of this investigation. We are cooperating fully with federal authorities and will hold anyone responsible for misconduct fully accountable. The questions from reporters came fast and aggressive. "Chief Thompson, isn't this just another example of racial profiling? What kind of training do your officers receive regarding implicit bias? How many other incidents like this have occurred in your department?" Thompson fielded the questions as best he could, but everyone in the room knew that this was a crisis that couldn't be managed with press conferences and official statements. The video evidence was too clear, and the public outrage was too intense. General Hayes had spent the morning at his home, fielding calls from military superiors, government officials, and media outlets. The Secretary of Defense had called personally to express his support and outrage. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs had offered to issue a statement. Even the president's office had reached out through military channels, but the general had declined most interviews and public statements. He was a military officer, not a political figure, and he understood the importance of choosing his words carefully. When he did speak publicly, it would be with purpose and precision. His wife, Carol, had been by his side throughout the morning, alternating between anger at what had happened and pride in how he had handled it. They had been married for 28 years, and she had seen him face many challenges. But nothing quite like this. "The way you handled yourself last night," she said as they sat together in their kitchen. "I've never been more proud of you." The general squeezed her hand. "I kept thinking about all the young soldiers I've commanded over the years. How could I ask them to maintain their composure under pressure if I couldn't do it myself?" At police headquarters, internal affairs investigators were beginning their review of the incident. The video evidence made their job both easier and harder. Easier because the facts were clear. Harder because those facts painted such a damning picture of police conduct. Detective Sandra Lopez, who was leading the internal investigation, had watched the videos dozens of times, looking for any possible justification for Mitchell's actions. She found none. There was no traffic violation, no suspicious behavior, no reasonable cause for the stop, let alone for drawing a weapon. "This is going to be a career-ending incident," she told her supervisor. "There's no way around it." Meanwhile, civil rights organizations were mobilizing. The NAACP had scheduled a press conference for that afternoon. The Urban League was organizing a peaceful demonstration. Legal advocacy groups were reaching out to General Hayes, offering their support and expertise. Dr. Patricia Williams, who had witnessed the incident the night before, was working with other community leaders to organize a response. "This incident shows that racial profiling doesn't stop at education, rank, or status," she told a reporter. "If a four-star general can be treated this way, what does that say about how ordinary citizens are treated every day?" The story was generating discussion far beyond the immediate community. Military bases around the world were buzzing with conversation about the incident. Soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines were sharing their own experiences with discrimination and profiling, using General Hayes' experience as a starting point for deeper conversations about race and justice. At Fort Bragg, where General Hayes had served early in his career, a group of junior officers organized an impromptu discussion about the incident. Captain Jessica Chen, a young Army officer, spoke for many when she said, "If this can happen to General Hayes, it can happen to any of us. We need to talk about this openly and honestly." By noon, Officer Mitchell had received official notice of his suspension. He was required to surrender his badge, his weapon, and his patrol car. The police union had assigned him a representative, but even they acknowledged that his position was nearly impossible to defend. Mitchell's father, a retired police officer himself, called that morning. The conversation was brief and painful. "Son," the older man said, "I don't understand what happened to you. This isn't how I raised you, and it isn't how I served." The psychological weight of the incident was beginning to take its toll on Mitchell. He had destroyed his career, embarrassed his family, and become a symbol of everything wrong with policing in America. The man he had humiliated had shown him more grace and dignity than he deserved, which somehow made it worse. General Hayes finally agreed to a brief interview with a national news network that afternoon. He appeared in his dress uniform, his bearing as dignified as always, his message carefully considered. "Last night's incident was unfortunate," he told the interviewer, "but it's important that we use it as an opportunity for learning and growth. This isn't just about one police officer or one traffic stop. It's about the broader issues of bias, assumptions, and the need for all of us to examine our own prejudices." When asked if he would press charges against Officer Mitchell, the general paused thoughtfully. "My goal isn't punishment," he said. "My goal is progress. If this incident can help start conversations that lead to positive change, then something good will have come from it." The interview was viewed by millions and shared widely on social media. Many people praised the general's grace and wisdom, while others argued that his measured response was too forgiving, given the severity of what had happened. Back in the suburban neighborhood where it all began, residents were struggling to understand how their quiet community had become the center of a national conversation about race and policing. Some were supportive of General Hayes and critical of the police response. Others were more defensive, arguing that the incident was an isolated mistake rather than a symptom of broader problems. The investigation would continue for weeks, but the outcome was never really in doubt. Mitchell would face departmental charges, possible criminal charges, and almost certain termination. His name would be forever associated with this incident, serving as a cautionary tale about the dangers of bias and the abuse of authority. For General Hayes, the incident would become part of his legacy, but not in the way anyone would have chosen. He would use the experience to advocate for police reform and racial justice, speaking at conferences and training sessions around the country. His dignity in the face of humiliation would be remembered long after the details of that night were forgotten. The videos would continue to circulate for years, viewed by police academies as an example of what not to do, by military training programs as an example of grace under pressure, and by civil rights organizations as evidence of problems that still needed to be addressed. In the end, a routine drive home had become a moment that changed lives, ended careers, and sparked a national conversation. It was a reminder that in an age of cell phone cameras and social media, every action has the potential to become a symbol, every encounter the possibility to reveal deeper truths about society. Officer Mitchell would eventually leave law enforcement entirely, his career and reputation permanently damaged by one night of poor judgment and unconscious bias. General Hayes would continue to serve with distinction, using his experience to help others understand the reality of discrimination and the importance of treating every person with dignity and respect. The quiet suburban street would return to normal, but the lessons from that night would continue to resonate far beyond the boundaries of any single neighborhood.